Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending our second annual Bridge Racial Justice and Equity Forum. My name is Amy Takanami. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I identify racially as Asian and ethnically as Japanese American, and I'll be facilitating tonight's forum with Ginny Vaz, who will be introducing herself shortly. Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity, also known as Bridge, was founded in 2016 to identify and clarify issues of racial injustice and inequity in Brookline and build a multiracial coalition to dismantle structural racism. Our hope for tonight's event is to provide the opportunity for Brookline citizens to be better informed about issues of racial justice and equity in the town and listen to how our potential representatives think, feel, and plan to act around these important issues.
As Amy shared, my name is Ginny Vaz. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I identify racially as Black and Dominican American. We want to share some procedural information for those in attendance. We will be running on a very tight and structured time frame. Please understand that this is not a debate with opportunities to rebut or engage in back and forth between candidates and attendees. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to all of the questions asked, and I will be flashing 30-second and stop card reminders, as well as muting respondents at the end of their time. Bridge has determined the order of responses to be fair to all candidates. If you are an audience member and have a question, please type it into the Zoom question and answer box, not the chat box, and/or you can post your question at Big Online or on our Facebook live streaming. And for each round, I will choose one question from the audience to pose to the set of candidates. At the end of both sessions, each candidate will have 90 seconds to provide closing remarks.
Bridge would also like to provide some information for the sake of transparency. Suzanne Federspiel has been a member of our Bridge leadership team for about 4 years, and Eric Hyatt has been an at-large member of Bridge for the past year. With that said, none of the candidates, including Suzanne or Eric, were involved or included in the planning of this forum. Bridge hopes to hold all select board and school committee members and candidates to our high expectations and standards around racial justice and equity in Brookline. Thank you all again for coming, and let's begin. We'll begin with our questions for our candidates for select board. The order of responses for this question will be Eric, Heather, then John. In addition to introducing yourself with your pronouns and how you identify racially and ethnically, please explain why racial justice and equity is important in your position you are seeking, and what actions do you intend to take to help work toward racial justice and equity this term if you're elected or re-elected.
All right, I've unmuted myself. Hi, my name is Eric Hyatt, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I identify as gay, Jewish, and a native Brookliner. Why are we here tonight? We're here to talk about racial equity. It's been just about a year since Brookline Town Meeting voted to apologize to firefighter Gerald Alston. That was almost a year ago, just at the end of Brookline Town Meeting. And at that time, Select Board member Raul Fernandez said, well, it's not enough to apologize. 5 months later, on October 3rd, 2019, the Select Board voted 4-1 to appeal the case and continue persecuting firefighter Gerald Alston. That decision, that vote, is what drove me into the race. That's why we're here tonight. At least that's why I'm here tonight. In addition to the Alston case, there's a broader issue about access to voting, inclusion in our community. Recently, the Select Board has 3 times modified our current election, the upcoming election that Heather and John and I are all candidates in. It needs to be made free and fair with better access. Finally, I want to say right up front, my intention as a Select Board member is to build inclusive community. I would want a community development block grant for Brookline to really make systemic changes to the way we operate and to increase inclusion in our town. I look forward to speaking more with you all tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And next, Heather.
Thank you. My name is Heather Hamilton. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I identify racially as white and ethnically as American. I'm running for re-election to the Select Board. I'm a transportation professional by day and once served as the Title VI specialist for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation in the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights, working on language access issues. I understand that equality and equity outcomes need to be engineered. They don't just happen. Things are not equal because history has not treated all populations the same. As a private citizen, I try to educate myself on things I can do. I try to call out racism and sexism when I believe I am witnessing it. And I try to surround myself with viewpoints and lived experiences different from my own. As a select person, I understand that we are obligated to provide equal access to everyone, regardless of their situation or skin color. We must be deliberate with our outreach and the culture we create. Two areas of government which have an enormous impact on communities of color are housing and transportation. I also feel a responsibility to diversify our town's boards and commissions, since they are an important layer of government that affects the lives of everyone in town. I'm committed to affordable housing and access to better transit. I'm committed to diversifying boards that are appointed by the Select Board, and I look forward to this discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And John, you're up next.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for having us tonight. And my identifiers are he, him, his. My heritage is Dutch and Anglo. And I will have to say that if I am elected, I will be the second Dutch American on the Select Board, to my knowledge. Jesse Mermel and I proudly share that heritage and our love of stroopwafels. People will learn what stroopwafels are if they haven't already learned. I want to very quickly say that I'm taking a cue from Raul Fernandez, who said he wanted tonight to be about policies. And so I'm going to quickly name several that I think have to be on the table. And one of them is resolving bias complaints. I think that's got to be front and center for the next Select Board. I think the issue of body cameras has got to be a concern and has got to be moved forward. I think we have to make progress with the equity fund, which we have just barely begun to develop. We need to treat the naming of the former Coolidge Corner School, the Florida Ruff and Ridley School, as just the beginning of a process of recognition of Brookline's history and the involvement of racism in its history. I would love to see that also take the direction that Barbara Brown has suggested recently, which is to create a walk in Brookline that identifies heroes of the struggle against racism. So we have a big agenda, and I'm anxious to get started on it.
Thank you, John. The order of responses for this next question will be Heather, John, then Eric. If elected, explain where you will begin in the work for racial justice and equity. What will be your first action as a sign of your priorities on racial justice?
Oh, that is hard to sum up in 90 seconds. I think the first task that we have before us on the Select Board is to square away the citizen complaint process. It's in draft form, and it's severely lacking, in my opinion. From what I understand, we don't necessarily follow up with people who have lodged complaints about town employees. I'm not confident that the investigation is done in an impartial manner, meaning that I think a truly impartial person, someone who is not housed in the department that is investigating a fellow department employee, is the right person to be conducting the investigation. So I think citizen complaints really remain one of the biggest question marks about how do we get this right.
Thank you, Heather. Next up is John.
Yes, I want to say that I have been present for some very significant programs that have taken place over the past year. Programs that dealt with racism in Brookline, the impact of racism on health, for example. And I'm aware of other programs that I wasn't able to attend. The Racial Justice Summit that was a year ago. I've also been present at select board meetings where Deborah Brown has done a very good job of whenever there is an announcement of a position that has opened up or a hiring that is about to take place, she just asks the question right out. You know, did you interview minority applicants? How many applied for this position? We need that kind of actual scorekeeping of how the town is doing. We seem to have the policies, we seem to have the intent, we don't seem to be getting the results. And I applaud Deborah for keeping that front and center. And I think that I'm going to make that a priority as well, to try to not just sort of make sure that we have the policies in place, but also make sure that we're getting the results that will move Brookline forward in terms of diversity in the workplace and in the town.
Thank you, John. And Eric?
Hi there. Yeah, I guess the first priority, as I mentioned, would be to undo the select board's position on the Gerald Alston case and see if that can be undone. That would be the symbolic gesture I would be looking for to, begin to change the town. Second, I would elect a new chair for the select board, someone who cares a lot more about inclusion and is willing to put it first. I think those are the first two things that we can do to really start to make change. Next, I would get all BHA housing repaired. I understand it would cost about $4 million to do it. I would apply for a community development block grant. These grants come from the federal government. It's one of the oldest, longest standing programs from the federal government. I think it's time. I think we're ready. Usually it's seen to go to very poor communities, but all of the aid coming into Brookline would be to help our lowest income residents. So those are like the things I would do as kind of, you can call those symbolic gestures, but they're a lot more than that. They're putting the right priorities on the table. I want to see that, make sure the agenda each week in select board is inclusion focused and inclusion based. And as Heather mentioned, the select board has the power to stock committees in the town, very important committees. Well, I want to look at these committees and see, why don't we have more participation by low-income people and minorities? Do we need childcare on those committees? To me, that's the obvious first solution. So I'd be looking to do that as well.
Thank you, Eric. The order of responses for this next question will be John, Eric, then Heather. What voices within the town government structures and outside the town government structures will you look to for help in making policy decisions around racial justice and equity?
So thank you for that question. I think we actually have a pretty good number of people to draw on in that respect. Let's with DICR. And let's start with Lloyd Gelano. Let's also start with Joan Lang, the chair of the commission. They are doing a lot of good work, and I think that perhaps the only thing that's lacking is the recognition that good work can't just stay within the purview of the commission. That good work has to be made part of the mission of the select board. Joan Langcourt, before COVID, and when people were still showing up at select board meetings to address the board from the microphone, delivered a terrific report, and she was followed by Lloyd Gelano, summing up what had taken place in the past year. What was remarkable about it was that there was a lot of depth to what has been, to the work of the DICR over the past year, and yet until that year-end report, I don't recall having heard too much about it and too much further discussion of it before the select board. And I think if we can take advantage of what the resources we already have and yet highlight them more and be more responsive to the work that's ongoing within DICR, and then get more communication going between DICR and departments, I think that would be a good place to start.
Thank you, John. Next is Eric.
Hi there. Yeah, I work as a professional Japanese translator, and I'm often very concerned about exclusion of our Asian communities in Brookline, and recently, not just exclusion, but straight up violence against Asian Americans in our community. I helped Joan Lancourt and the commission hopefully hire its first Asian American. I'm hoping that that person will say yes and will be able to join soon. But I think that having a greater representation on committees is how we get things done. I really feel the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations should be granted investigative power. That power was stripped away from that commission and should be restored. I feel that the town does not do a particularly good job of reaching out to our non-English speaking residents. I taught ESL in the program at the Brookline Library for a number of years. And I would like to see our town's materials and our websites generated in Japanese, in Spanish, in Chinese, in the languages that are spoken and used every day in Brookline. So I think it's important to reach out. And in terms of bodies in the town, I think that is the body. The Commission and the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations will both have a much more significant role if I'm on the select board. That's my promise.
Thank you, Eric. And next, Heather.
So I'm going to echo a number of things that Eric brought up. The Asian community represents about 17% of our population, and they are not that well represented in our various boards, commissions, and especially town meeting. Some populations distrust government, or they just don't get involved. And I think it's incumbent upon us to try to figure out ways to reach them. I think the town does not do a very good job of communicating. The fallback position of most governments is an opt-in system where you ask for someone to sign up for notifications, provide their information. We have a lot of information about the people that reside within Brookline, and maybe it crosses into creepy, but I think that we need to start using other forms of communication. We've played around with trying to get more signage up in high traffic areas, but to Eric's point, we need to do a better job in providing language access. And I think we also need to start using more of our businesses. That's where people go. That's their comfort zone. It will be very difficult given this new reality, but I think that we have a lot of room to grow, and it's all about networks. We need to leverage all of the existing networks of people who are already plugged in, make them aware of the growth areas, and target those.
Thank you, Heather. And I'm going to pass it now off to Ginny to ask a question from the audience.
Hi. I will now be posing a question from the audience. The order of responses for this question will be Heather, Eric, then John. One question from attendees. This question will include the name and their question. This question is by, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce it, is by Savon Cohen. If elected, will you vote to end the appeal of the civil service decision reinstating firefighter Gerald Alston? Yes or no answers, please, and then elaborate. And just a side note, if anybody else has a question, please post it in our question and answer box for the next section. You may begin.
Okay, so I don't expect this to come before the select board again. It came before the select board because there was an opportunity to either appeal or not appeal last fall because there was a judgment issued. It's going before the appeals court. And I said in my statement then that part of the reason I was appealing is because I do think that so much time has passed that we need an independent judge to tell us whether we got this right or wrong. I read that Civil Service Commission report twice, one as a sitting select board member and then one as a woman, replacing Gerald Alston's name with a woman's name. And it was truly troubling. So just because I voted for the appeal does not, in my opinion, reflect on the merits of his case. I just think that in order to reach something that both parties can accept. We need another arbiter. That being said, I also said in my statement that I would not vote for any further appeal, and I will hold to that.
Thank you so much for your answer, Heather. Eric?
Well, of course, I would vote to do anything I can to get away from this case. I think it reflects terribly on the town of Brookline, and I would have voted with Select Board Member Ralph Fernandez in this case. But going forward, this case needs to stop. It's reflecting terribly on our town. The Civil Service Commission's report is very, very, very upsetting. I've read it a couple times too, and I can't say enough that this case needs to stop. The town needs to get away from this. We need justice for Gerald Alston, which means an end to this case, and let him move on with his life and move forward. I don't see anything else to say about the Alston case except it was a long time ago. It's dragging our town down. It's making our people of color feel extremely, extremely anxious, and we need to end it.
Thank you, Eric. John?
Yeah, I want to take issue with the other two candidates on this. Michael Sandman, the current chair of the advisory committee, and I did not favor the apology to Gerald Alston because of serious concerns about the impact that would have on the rights of the various defendants from the select board to continue the appeal of various cases that have been brought. And we thought that it would constitute undermining of their access to a fair outcome and a final determination of the cases that were brought against them, by the way. We didn't want to just stop short of an apology. And so we drafted a very, very strong statement condemning in the clearest possible terms any racially biased, ethnically biased, bias of any kind in language by department employees in Brookline. Unfortunately, that didn't pass. I wish it had. I continue to believe that the word justice is central to this whole matter. And people seem to be overlooking the justice that should be allowed to the current members of the select board and former members who were sued and who have a tremendous amount at stake, both in terms of their reputations and possibly financially. And to deny them a full and fair hearing of the case all the way to the final appeal,
Thank you,
saying they
John.
have to be not fair to them. It's not justice.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your answer. We all do. Amy, I'm passing it on to you.
So that ends the question and answer period. We'd like to give our candidates an opportunity to make a final statement. The order of the final statements will be Eric, John, then Heather.
Thank you. I want to make it clear that when you want to talk about inclusion, as we've been talking about tonight, inclusion does not start with outreach. That's just the opposite of how it works. Inclusion has to start with people that actually want to be included. And I mean, often that involves those people listening to them, lifting them up, going into their communities, hearing their voices. That is how we get to inclusion. It's not something that you can take a committee of white people and try to add a Black member or an Asian member to the committee. It's identifying what are the systemic reasons that people of color don't feel welcome to participate on these committees, and low-income people might have actual logistical difficulties. I can't stress enough again, childcare is one of the crucial aspects of our town government to have a truly inclusive town government. And as a select board member, I will be fighting for this. No one's going to get denied being on a committee because they have kids or can't figure it out. I will find a way. I have found a way through the town's diversity, inclusion, community relations office already to lift up the voices of minorities, immigrants, others in our community who haven't been heard enough. As a select board member, those voices will come first. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Next, John.
I think the way forward is for all of us to recognize that over time, we've had difficulty, and it happens time and again, in recognizing the legacy of slavery and how that is impacting us to this very day, and how we are part of that. And I include myself. I include people in Brookline generally. None of us can escape the impact that that had in terms of our ability to see clearly the other person. And it's a struggle. It's hard. And it gets worked out in these issues that come before town meeting occasionally. And we have to keep working on it. We have to keep striving towards the goal of not allowing racism to be part of our policies, to be embedded in our policies. And I'm just going to cite an example from very, very recent example, the NAACP statement on climate change, which until the NAACP made its statement was largely viewed as a matter of carbon, ice caps, melting, temperatures. And then the NAACP comes along and points out what we all should have been aware of, which is that climate change impacts diverse communities excessively. And it is part of an injustice that needs to be addressed. So we need to see injustice everywhere that it exists, and we need to break through some barriers of perception to do that. And I'd love to see that happen in Brookline.
Thank you, John. Heather?
Racial justice is a practice, and it never stops. There is always work to be done, and it is a team effort. As we have discussed here tonight, there are many things we can do and must do. I look forward to working on these efforts and bringing others to the table. Access to affordable housing and reliable transportation that puts people first, not cars, disproportionately impacts vulnerable communities for the better. I have demonstrated that I am committed to these two values and capable of making them happen. Thank you to Bridge for hosting this informative event and this evening.
Great. Thank you to all three of our select board candidates for their time and responses this evening. Next, we're just going to keep moving along to our questions for our school committee candidates. So that would be Andy, Mariah, and Suzanne. Welcome to the three of you. The order of responses for our first question for the three of you will be Andy, Mariah, then Suzanne. So in addition to introducing yourself with your pronouns and how you identify racially and ethnically, please explain why racial justice and equity is important in your position that you are seeking, and what actions you intend to take to help work towards racial justice and equity this term if you are elected or re-elected. Andy, you're muted.
See that now. Thank you. My name is Andy Liu. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I identify as Asian American and specifically as Chinese American. I think I'll just start with something very concrete where I think school committee can have a real impact. And one of the most effective ways to improve educational outcomes for students of color is just for us to do better at hiring and retaining teachers of color. We currently do not do a very good job at that. I think one of the major problems that teachers of color sometimes have coming into the district is a feeling of isolation. There's just not a critical mass, and it can be very hard to find good mentorship. So in some of the schools, teachers of color have come together and formed working groups. Something the district really ought to be doing is making it possible for these groups to come together across the town, talk with each other, share ideas, and maybe most importantly, just to expand the personal networks through which people can find mentors. And it doesn't take a huge amount of resources. It's the sort of thing where I think if school committee made it a priority, then the district could make it happen.
Great, thank you, Andy. Next, Mariah.
Good evening. My name is Mariah Nobrega. She, her, hers. I identify as white and American. I agree with Andy completely about hiring and retention being critical to achieving many of our goals. I'd also like to see us acting to improve the paraprofessional to teacher pipeline to increase the teachers of color that we have in the district by really training and promoting our own staff that are already working with us. And I'd also like to see us doing some unconscious bias training within the teacher pool and educator pool as well. These are things that I think we could be working on within the teachers and the educators, and within the, I'd also like to see how we can be using our resources to provide better opportunities, not just academic opportunities, but also much more experiential and wraparound services for whole child experiences, so that kids can really have a much more level playing field in terms of the type of things that they get to experience as part of a Brookline education.
Thank you, Mariah. Suzanne?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm Suzanne Federspiel. I identify as she, her, hers. Those are pronouns I use. I identify as white, European American. So you're going to hear actually tonight that the three of us, maybe it's because we're uncontested, but we do agree on many things. So I certainly agree with what Andy and Mariah said. I'm going to take a slightly different turn here and say that one of the reasons that it is so important that we get this right is that our children learn best when they are in safe environments with strong relationships with the adults in the school. And in order to make that happen, we need to have teachers that look like our students, and we need to retain teachers that look like our students and have good working relationships with the adults. And what I want to point out a little bit is that we have much of the expertise that we need right in the district. And it's really, I think, imperative that we follow the lead of our staff, our students, and our families and administrators of color, so that we can support them and follow their lead. They know what we need to do. We need to listen. And then in addition, teachers who are white need to do the work to find out what this is about, and to be aware of microaggressions, of disappointments that they may bring to the students. And that's the work, some of the work that we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. The order of responses for our second question will be Suzanne, Andy, then Mariah. If elected, please explain where you will begin your work for racial justice and equity. What will be your first action as a sign of your priorities on racial justice as a select board member, school committee member?
School committee, sure. Well, I will continue some of the work I've been doing. So as a member of Bridge, I have the opportunity to meet with Dr. Khalees Warnham, who is our Senior Director of Equity. I will certainly continue that work. I will promote actually more involvement at the school level. School site councils are a powerful way for families and parents to be involved at their school level. Those should be diverse committees. They should represent the student population. So that would be another place that I would go. And I would encourage the work that Dr. Warnham is doing in terms of bringing training to our teachers and promoting promoting the work that we need to do, being aware of curriculum biases and what we need to do to bring that to our work in the classroom.
So you asked, you asked what is the first thing I would do. Unfortunately, I think the first thing we're going to have to do as a newly installed school committee is to deliver a massive cut to the school budget. Well, it will be delivered to us, and we will have to figure out how to make it work. I think the absolute first priority in doing this will be to protect the most vulnerable kids. We will have to, the school committee, I think, needs to be much more hands-on in the budget process than it usually is. And in particular, I think there always needs to be somebody in the room for these policy discussions who sees it as their task to be asking themselves and other people, are we creating disparate access? Are we creating disparate impact with this proposal? I could be that person in the room sometimes. Other school committee members could also do it. And I think in some situations, it would be appropriate to bring in someone from the outside, perhaps through CDICR, who would be trained to actually be paying attention to this.
Thank you, Andy. And Mariah?
Thank you. I agree with Andy that really our first step is going to be looking at the budget. And I think that we are going to absolutely have to make cuts. And the question is not only where we cut, but where we add, because we're going to really need to think about where our priorities are. And one of the things that has always been obvious, but has been really laid bare over the past couple months, is the lack of social net for many children here in Brookline. And we need to be looking at where we can be using the school budget to really supplement and enhance the experience of children, and how we can be doing a better job to support them and their families. And so really, it's not just going to be about cuts, it needs to be about additional expenses in some areas.
Thank you, Mariah. As school committee members, what is your role in promoting racial justice and equity for historically most marginalized students? So students of color, low-income students, students living in public housing, etc., regarding our curriculum, educators, and administrators. And the order of responses here will be Mariah, Suzanne, then Andy.
So just so I make sure I understood the question, it's what is our role to advocate for students of marginalized students as well as staff administrators? Is that correct?
So promoting racial justice and equity for historically most marginalized students, regarding in terms of like what you would do around curriculum, educators, and administrators.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So I think that this is an incredibly complicated question, but I really am interested again in how we can be developing programs that can really support students even further than what we already have. I would like to see again how we can be doing a better job with our educator, paraprofessional, and educator support networks, how we can be helping people by providing the resources and the time that they need to build support networks for themselves, how we can be doing a much better job, for example, of hiring and bringing people into the community through, for example, partnerships with HBCUs, which have teacher training programs. So these are some of the areas that I'd like to see us doing a better job in really building towards. I'm also, as Andy mentioned earlier, we can be partnering with the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. And I am a current commissioner. I joined the commission last year. So I'm certainly interested in how we can bring commission values and bring some of that lens to broader activities and through school committee.
Thank you, Mariah. Suzanne?
Yes, I mean, it is our job to always be asking the questions of equity, of inequities, and so school committee has a responsibility to do that. We have a responsibility to ask questions, tough questions, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we speak for the public on that. And so it does require that we take a look at data sometimes, that we take a look at, for instance, an example would be suspensions and expulsions to make sure that one group is not overrepresented. We have to do that when we looked at special education, make sure that one group is not over or underrepresented. And so we have a responsibility to do that. We also have a responsibility to listen to those in the district who are the experts on this. So we have many teachers, administrators of color, and we need to make sure that we give them a format to present what they're thinking, what their ideas are, and to listen and to act on that. They can tell us much of what we need to know in moving the district forward.
I think that to try to address opportunity gaps arising from structural racism, it's important to start really early. I think that school committees should be trying to lay the political and institutional groundwork for expanding access to pre-K education in Brookline, especially to families who can't afford a commercial daycare. And then once kids do get to kindergarten, I think we should have less emphasis than we currently do on sort of uniform reading standards for the kindergartners, and perhaps emphasize more just trying to identify kids who might be at risk of falling behind in reading and try to get them the support they need sort of really early on. And beyond that, I would go back to what I said earlier. I would concentrate on hiring and retaining teachers of color, making sure they have institutional support and opportunities for mentorship when they're here so that they can flourish.
Thank you. I will now be posing one question from the audience, and the order of responses for this question will be Andy, Suzanne, then Mariah. Actually, correction. If it's all right with everyone, I'm going to pose two questions from the audience because we are running ahead of schedule and we have time. Is that okay? Okay, great. Thank you. So question number one has been asked by Paul Harris. How will you assess the ability of candidates for the Brookline School Department, for the Brookline School District Superintendent to create a more diverse and inclusive school system?
I think that for me, the most important personal quality I would be looking for in a superintendent candidate would be what I would call forthrightness. In this context, what that means is the willingness to have uncomfortable conversations out in public. I think being willing to do that is a prerequisite for improving racial equity. I think the first two questions I would probably ask, I might ask a superintendent candidate would be, what did you do in your previous job to change your organization so that students were better served? And second, how did you change that organization so that teachers were better served? So these are not questions specifically about race, but I think that the answers to these questions should really open a window onto the effect that the candidate would likely have on the racial climate in Brookline.
Thank you.
So it turns out that we do ask questions about that when we were on the search committee, and we do ask the candidate to talk about what they have done to address inequities in previous districts that they've served, what what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them, and what would they see as the job that they would need to do here in Brookline. So the candidates are asked those questions and with follow-up, and I think it's important that we hear what they have to say about that, and I look to see if they understand what we're even asking. Sometimes they don't, and for me, that's a red flag. One time, a candidate talked about equity in sports money, and that's not what we were asking about. So we do ask directly, and we do expect to hear a track record of addressing these issues.
Yes, I would agree completely that really what we need is someone with an experienced superintendent who has experience really in this particular area, who can speak about it. And I'd also like to say that a personal quality I'd like to see is one of empathy, because it's often very easy to be, I think, the superintendent or the leader of a large organization and to lose that connection with the everyday teacher and the everyday student. And I really want to see someone who has really embodied empathetic response in their experience that they can talk about, that will make us realize that they're going to be a humane leader and not just an effective leader.
Thank you very much for answering that question. The second round of question order will be Suzanne, Mariah, and Andy. And the question is, and again, I apologize from the audience if I mispronounce your name, is from Burton Leggett. What are some racial justice / equity concerns you have witnessed or experienced in the Brookline public school system amidst the coronavirus pandemic, and what would you do differently if you were elected?
They're wondering what I've witnessed during the pandemic. Is that what they're asking, or just in general?
I think the question is, what have you witnessed during this pandemic that would have some impact? And if it's not just specifically pandemic related, this has brought out a lot of issues of equity. So if you could address that, that would be helpful.
Well, since the pandemic, some of the inequities have come more to the forefront, I will say that. And what we have noticed is that in some families, there is easy access to internet, and there are families who do not have access to internet. Same with Chromebooks and computers, and also even the basics. Food, as we know, is so very important. And the school committee has made a real effort to meet those needs. And so we are offering food through our kitchens. We've done hundreds of meals. We have offered Chromebooks. We give those out to the families in need, and we offer internet help if we can. And so if there are families listening out there who do not yet have those very basic needs, they should contact their schools, the principal, to let us know, because we are still working on that. But it has been clear that obviously that some families have real needs that interfere with their ability to access the teaching, and therefore it interferes with their learning. And so we're very concerned about that and are doing our best to meet those needs.
So I would agree with Suzanne that, you know, some of the biggest challenges, or some challenges, have been around technology access and stuff. And PSB has tried to, I think, do some of this, but it's really been insufficient for a lot of families. When you have, for example, 3 kids in a family, and PSB is giving out 1 laptop per family, and the kids are expected to each be doing hours of work a day, it's really been not enough for many families to really be able to access equitably when other families might have 1 device per child, or even more than 1 device per child. And so that's been a big issue that I think is still ongoing, and really needs to be looked at very thoroughly for the remainder of this school year, and absolutely for next school year, what we can be doing to get sufficient access when we are, as I expect we will be, in at least some periods of remote or hybrid instruction. And I think beyond that is the broader issue of what we're doing with working families, right? I mean, we have some families who have 1 parent who stays at home and they can afford that, or we have families who only have 1 parent. And so what we're doing to ensure that kids not only have the technology and the food, but also the appropriate supports at home to enable their success. And that's really going to be a work in progress. And for working parents, it's very difficult, and we need to do more.
For me, I think what kids right now maybe need most of all from the schools, and especially the most vulnerable kids who may not have as much support at home, is live, real-time access to their teachers, interactions with their teachers. And I've been really disturbed by the enormous disparities in real-time access that different kids are getting right now, even kids in the same grade. So just as an example close to hand, my son is a 2nd grader, and my neighbor's son is also a 2nd grader. My son right now has been getting 280 minutes a week of real-time instruction from his teacher, and that's wonderful. Our neighbor's son is getting closer to 60 minutes. And these disparities have persisted throughout the 2 months of this shutdown so far. We've not had, I think, a satisfying explanation of why this is still going on, and something needs to be done about it.
Thank you. That ends the question and answer period for our school committee candidates. We'd like to give our candidates an opportunity to make a final statement. The order of responses for this final statement will be Mariah, Andy, then Suzanne.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you. No, you know, the school committee is always a challenge, and I think that the next year or 2 years in front of us are going to be even greater of a challenge than ever. But I'm certainly eager to be taking on this task, to be working to support all children, and to really bring equity to even more of what we do to really help the kids of Brookline and the educators as well, because this is education is of course the basis of what we're all about and how we really advance the next generation. And so I'm really eager to take on this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariah. Next is Andy.
Yeah, I think I'll just take these 90 seconds to say a few words about sort of what school was like for me as a racial minority. And so I started school in the United States not knowing any English. I grew up in a small town in New England. My best guess is that maybe 1 in every 1,000 residents was Asian. So I really stuck out and I got picked on all the time. I would go to school every day, pretty much knowing that at some point somebody would insult me. And I would occasionally encounter teachers who would say things like, Oriental people are very polite. Why aren't you polite? So, I don't know what it's like to grow up as an African-American child or as a Latino child. I think I can put myself in the shoes of any child who is constantly harassed and who grows up knowing that a lot of people have strong prior beliefs about you based on how you look. And so in trying to make policy on school committee, I am ready to do battle for that child.
Thank you, Andy. And finally, Suzanne.
Yes, I just want to say thank you to the community for allowing me to have these 3 years to serve on the school committee. It has been a lot of work, but it is work that is so very important. And there's nothing more important than to make sure that every child feels welcomed and safe and cared for in our schools. And that's the work that we need to do. And so going forward, we have only scratched the surface on some of this, and we need to spend more time and more energy making sure that we have the right people in place to help with mental health concerns. There's certainly going to be some fallout from the pandemic. Children will come to school, we hope, in the fall, but they may be scared or anxious. Certainly the parents may be as well. And so we really need to address this head on for all our children, but especially for those who feel vulnerable for any number of reasons. And that's the work of the school committee, to make sure that policies are in place to help our educators work with the students and make this happen. Just a shout out to our teachers. They've done a phenomenal job over these last 8-9 weeks. And I'd like to come back to the school committee and support them in the many ways that would be helpful to them, so that our children feel safe, cared for, and in an environment where they can take a risk, because learning is risky, and we want them to have joy in their learning. So thank you very much for this. I appreciate that we had this opportunity.
Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you to all 3 of our candidates, Mariah and Andy, as well, for your responses. And also to our select board candidates earlier this evening, Eric, Heather, and John, for your participation in tonight's forum. And for all of our audience members also for joining us. We hope the questions and these responses were enlightening and will help you in your consideration for both select board and school committee candidates. Please be sure to vote on June 9th. You may also consider submitting an early or absentee ballot, which can be found at brooklinemass.gov. Thank you all again, and have a good rest of your evening.